The future, it's scary, isn't it? Seeing everything around you change and become more advanced while you can barely keep up. It's a little terrifying when you stop to think about it. But it doesn't matter to think about it now. Your eye implant is bugging, and the money from your last job hasn't arrived yet. At this point, hoping that you haven't been scammed is useless. Now, if you can't handle the pressure from society, your only fate is red stains in a random concrete alley. But calm down, I don't want to scare you. Everyone here goes through this. In the city, everyone has goals. You just have to try to achieve yours. A place where dreams can come true, but they also can collide with your worst nightmares. So turn on your neural implants and hold on tight. That now is the time to dive into a place where every pixel holds a secret and every shadow carries a story. Welcome to the dirty, neon-drenched world. Here, how far you will get will depend solely on what you are willing to do. And the future is as bright as the flashing neon lights on a holographic sign. Connect yourself and let's explore the circuits of anime. Welcome to the future. Welcome to Cyberpunk Anime. We are on the edge of a digital frontier. Behind, a world that until then was normal. In front of you, the physical world is less important than what happens inside machines. In a situation like this, it would be good if you had a guide on what to do and what to expect, right? Because tomorrow, an AI could come and steal your work for good. Now what? Well, it turns out that the best human guide is imagination, and the imagination inside the organic heads of several people have already put the work of making a path in front of you. A path that at the time of these people was just fiction, but today, reality is getting closer and closer to fantasy. Stories like this are called science fiction, but I'm sure when that word passes through your outdated brain drive, you don't think about cyberpunk things because, it's another genre of stories. But genres evolve, and those that start in one way, after establishing themselves, people explore doing the same in other forms. That's when the idea of cyberpunk started to appear. The year is around 1970 and 1980. The sci-fi genre has become too familiar for some authors, so they thought, what if I put things that are starting to appear now in real life and imagine what they would be like in an extrapolated future. And if you look around you without filters, it's inevitable that technology will come together with money, violence, and drugs. During these years, this idea of a dirty sci-fi without fancy people teleporting pizza inside the house started to change. The theme then started to mature until the arrival of Neuromancer. Neuromancer is not an anime, nor is it even a manga, much less was done by a Japanese author, but it was certainly made based on Japanese culture, the same culture that was going through an incredible economic bubble that sent the country into insane growth, a growth that visually you can already understand where Cyberpunk's art style is based. Just seeing Tokyo after that time means that you don't even have to think twice, but a bubble has to burst, and when it comes to money, despair dominates the light up streets at night, and the future seems to not exist. But Neuromancer is not set in Tokyo, but rather a version of Chiba, a region that especially at the time was well developed in terms of production and factories. Before, the genre was just a different idea of science fiction, but now Neuromancer has arrived to put a stop on the neon and say, this is cyberpunk. Insanely tall buildings with an entire ecosystem inside, pollution sky colors sadder than putting milk in the bowl and seeing that you are out of cereal. Cyberspace runners, mercenaries, AI, all the basics of the cyberpunk theme are outlined in Neuromancer, and thus, combining with the title of a book by Bruce Battke from 1983, Cyberpunk was born. Just as people in the West loved this genre that doesn't hold back on showing anything, and generated several other books like John Mnemonic, films like Blade Runner, and board games like Cyberpunk 2020, people in the East also loved it a lot, because after all, Japanese culture was already already innately linked to the emergence of the genre. A genre that is for sci-fi what dark fantasy is for high fantasy. A person who looks for Tolkien's stories is not necessarily the same person who looks for Kentaro Miura's stories. The desire to consume what is supposedly wrong, taboo, a story that makes you feel tense, scared, afraid, attracted many people, and in parallel with the Western world, the world of Japanese cyberpunk stories began to appear. Akira. This is one of the first and perhaps one of the most important. Many only know the movie, but the manga is equally important and began much earlier. Akira was a work that opened the world's eyes to what was possible in an animation of this genre, and along with Neuromancer, it helped define what cyberpunk is back in the beginning. The possibility was created, a genre that was previously only adapted in books, physical games, and at most live-action movies. Now it has received a new touch, one that fits perfectly with everything the genre addresses, combining the hostile and dirty technological future with the imagination of the past, done in the past. Akira's aesthetic is simply perfect for the cyberpunk theme. You can say anything bad about the story, but the hand-drawn animation from the mid-1980s is done excellently here and is simply perfect, especially for this genre. It's dirty, it's analogous, and it's a puzzle piece that fits perfectly into a dirty technological theme. Akira showed the world what cyberpunk is, what an animated film is, and also what art is. And the world responded by wanting more. But things are not quite black and white. The common definitions of the cyberpunk genre still took a few years to mature, and other stories after Akira began to emerge, but with some different aspects of what we recognize today as cyberpunk. The Akira manga was initially released in 1982 and received a lot of attention from readers and other authors, even before its animated movie came out in 88. One of these authors is called Shirow Masamune. If you recognize this name, you must already know the weight this guy carries in this genre. But hold on, we are still in the middle of the 80s, what you are thinking doesn't exist yet, okay? So, a year after Akira, this new author appears with a doujinshi, Buraco Mágico, also known as Black Magic. This doujinshi proved to be very different and stood out, putting the name of Shirow Masamune in people's heads, a story in which you can already perfectly understand the author's conflict tendencies in a sci-fi environment, a different but familiar world, advanced, technological, and a certain contrast in the feeling of what it is to be a living being and what it is to be a machine, blurring the limits of each one. This doujinshi proved popular enough to receive an official publication in 1985 and also an OVA in 87, even before the Akira movie, but the OVA isn't very similar to the manga, so they are almost two separate stories. But Black Magic, even though it received some notoriety, it was still in its infancy, both in the quality of the author's storytelling and in the cyberpunk genre itself. But that's when in 85 he appears with two other stories. The first and the most famous of the two is Dominion, a manga that somehow I always end up talking about indirectly in my videos, but anyway, a manga that is very important in several themes and in different ways, being one of the main pillars of the golden age of the OVAs and also one of the works that helped popularize the idea of catgirls in society, and now also a big step within cyberpunk. Dominion was noticeably better than Black Magic. The way it told a story improved, showing a screwed up, polluted and dirty city amidst violence and brutal ways of dealing with things in a place like that, because there isn't anything much cooler than being a police officer in the future and your work vehicle being a tank. But here, the story also crawls amidst cyberpunk. Not all of them, but several points that are common in the theme nowadays are present here. Hackers, organizations, globalization, and of course, androids, yeah. However, Dominion is very short, and in the same year, Shirow Masamune starts Appleseed. Similar to Dominion, the quality of Appleseed once again increases, and it lasted until mid-89, and was even popular in a way, a story that only old heads should normally know, because outside of Japan, it didn't have that much traction despite having spawned several films and even an anime series in addition to the standard OVA, and even receiving quality awards. Appleseed is simply a juggernaut in this whole trajectory of what we are talking about in this video. No, literally, a juggernaut. One of the few stories that mecha receive a substantial level of attention in the genre, that is now beginning to solidify into a form that we perhaps recognize more nowadays without a second thought. And now, if you didn't know, you are already starting to understand the weight of the name that Shirow Masamune started to hold, right? But that's nothing yet, because his best work is yet to come. But hold on, because before that, some important things happened too. 1987 was an important year for Japanese cyberpunk. Very memorable works came out here. One of them is Money Meikyo Monogatari. Ah, you don't know it? This movie is also called Neo Tokyo. If you have watched or read Akira, sounds familiar, right? Well, this film contains 3 different stories. One of them is literally made by Katsuhiro Otomo, the author of Akira, and it served well as a basis for the revolutionary movie that came out the following year. Just seeing the similarities between the 2 works, you can already understand how this all happened. But that's not all. Elsewhere in Japan, a guy named Kenichi Sonoda, yep, the same author as Gunsmith Cats that we talked about recently, he then helped produce the characters of a work, Bubblegum Crisis. In the land of OVAs, this one didn't even have a manga and went straight to TV, and has great similarities with Akira. Instead of Neo Tokyo, is Mega Tokyo. It's not an awful thing in 2020 that happens, but an earthquake in 2032, a city that suffered a lot, but was rebuilt by the efforts of a large organization using machines. A land divided figuratively and physically. Social classes are more distant than ever. The disparity between the real world and an inch away from anarchy and the dominance of a mega corporation over everything is mega present here. Of the stories that emerged while the theme was solidifying, Bubblegum Crisis was certainly the one that most resembles the theme today, but even so, with its freedoms that go a little outside of this diagram, because after all, the story that definitively defined what cyberpunk means was yet to come out. The story that left not only Japan, but the entire world open-mouthed and exploding with possibilities. The film that did this came out in 1995, but it was in 1989 that the manga was made. Which manga, do you ask me? Just Shirow Masamune's magnum opus, and for a large percentage of the world, the pinnacle of cyberpunk, Kokaku Kidotai, also known as Ghost in the Shell. If you have gotten this far in a video just about cyberpunk, especially with my accent, it's very likely that I don't even need to explain what Ghost in the Shell is, right? What Akira was for the beginning of the genre, Gitz was for solidifying it. Motoko Kusanagi adventure in that horribly technological, brutal, heavy world, a place where anything goes to survive, and the infinite journey of discovering what humanity is, and what it means to be a person or a machine resonated around the world. A character, she, who is just a soul in an absurd city who lives like an organism. A big machine, a ghost in a shell. The limited vision of life begins to blend and blur in the infinite possibilities that technology produces and continues to create. What are the limits of all of this? How long will the sterile machine last, and how much will the biological system endure in such a place? Implants, bad eyes, swap with another one. got shot in the leg, just pay around 300 euros and the price of the operation, and in a few hours it will be as if nothing had happened, because after all, memories are nothing more than data points inside someone's head. If they are deleted, no one will notice. But at this point, Ghost in the Shell asks the world, are you still you? And unfortunately, with the irony of the future, Ghost in the Shell suffered from its own questions. Suffering from success, this story also asks, is Ghost in the Shell still Ghost in the Shell? Gits was huge for the world and inspired many people and authors. Matrix, for example, would not exist without Ghost in the Shell. But also, just as corporations within the Cyberpunk team only seek the sweet nectar of money, Ghost in the Shell was that same nectar for the giants' pockets. Films, series, specials, more movies, OVAs, more series, some good, others very bad. But anyway, even in such a promising team, so full of possibilities and almost no competition, from the first movie onwards, nothing else captures the same magical essence of Cyberpunk. Standalone Complex being the only one that reaches some point of quality that you enjoy your time watching. The rest is like watching a cow being milked to death. Some are still fun, others challenge your ability to think, not by exploring well existential themes, but by being just horrible. At some point, sometimes consuming only the famous works is better. But it's undeniable the impact that Ghost in the Shell had on the cyberpunk world, whether Japanese or Western. Everyone stopped to watch that movie, and even today, there are just a few who can go head to head in this genre. Ghost in the Shell would then be the apex, perhaps. So from then on, the genre is now very mature, its themes are well defined, and the first work that put everything into practice is perhaps at the top of it all. Now is the journey to take its place. Can anyone do it? Dominion still makes its strides over the years, but nothing that notable. Appleseed is the same thing, but at this point, it's like fighting against yourself, right? Shirow Masamune almost has a monopoly on this, but I mean, I forgot to mention that the competition has been going since 1990. Gunmu, a story published by an arm of Jump that went head to head with Ghost in the Shell. Maybe not with such insane popularity, but also with a large audience. My bad. Maybe you know this story as Battle Angel Alita. In the same environment, in the explosion of cyberpunk, some other stories went hand in hand with these two giants of the 90s, some with more success than others. Cyber City Oedo, Armitage 3, Genocyber, until in 1997, Blam, and subsequently Noise appeared. A story that approaches the whole idea of cyberpunk in a different way, with mega structures that are much larger than even planets, corporates, construction robots, and even the internet or the established cyberspace of Neuromancer, with terrorists and wanderers in a physically and cybernetically alien human city. Blam, it's not a story that has the same reputation as Ghost in the Shell, but it is one that has carved out a very strong niche within the community, being those who like cyberpunk or those who just like a good story. Its visuals and the journey in that relatively terrifying place are enough for those who like stories that make you wonder in what is shown in front of you. And before Modern Times, the following year, came out a very divisive work in this genre, a story that for some it's impossible to be more cyberpunk, but for others it is impossible to be cyberpunk due to the lack of some aspects. This story is Serial Experiments Lain, a story that if you are not activating all three of your brain cells, you won't understand anything that is going on. An existential story by nature that shows you the fine balance between real life and virtual life, the difference between your physical self and yourself created and manufactured by technology. Lain's message was dictated by you. Who are you? And that time you are part of the world. Those who watched in the 2000s had a completely different experience from those who watched in the 2010s, and it will also be completely different from those who watched in the 2020s, 2030s, and in the future. An insane timeless work that simply everyone has to watch at some point. But Lain is a particular case when we talk specifically about cyberpunk, because here don't have gigantic cities, neon lights or bizarre people everywhere. Here, not even a big city is shown properly like that. Normal houses in peripheral neighborhoods are the focus. Analogous colors of a hand-drawn animation are enough to provoke the bad and restless feeling of a world statically in motion, and without a real sense of existing that makes you think. But because of this, of only having a percentage of the entire cyberpunk genre, some people may be resistant to calling Lain a cyberpunk series. But just like almost all the stories we have talked about here, just a few follow the same line and entire patterns of themes from the cyberpunk genre. So in the end, it's up to you. With the turn of the millennium, the frequency of stories appearing in the genre decreased. Of course, there were stories that brushed against it at different levels of purity, and perhaps tried to make a name for themselves, some more successful than others. Paprika, Psycho Pass, Akudama Drive, Dimension W, and of course the countless random Ghost in the Shell out there. But always with the same type of base idea, but with different ways of developing. As time passed and what people in the 80s and 90s saw as the future becoming more and more real and morphing to the present, the general interest in cyberpunk in an anime format has somewhat waned. Although apart from a few key stories, it has always been a less popular genre among the masses, and just like sci-fi, it started to give off a feeling that it had already been sold and perhaps was already a little too boring. Cyberpunk also started to have the same feeling, seeing the ins and outs of several below average Ghost in the Shell that never come close to the potential of the first movie or the theme itself, which has a lot to be explored, began to make the genre cool down and perhaps become dull. The future maybe began to become too real for an old imagination. But perhaps out of nowhere, we had a surprise. So look around me. This game may not have been the best thing in the world. It may not have had the best release. But it's impossible to deny that the world that Mike Pondsmith created at the height of the team way back then isn't sensational, right? And with that, another story emerged. One that no one expected to work for several reasons. One that not only itself, but carrying an entire genre on its back, stood on the edge of the precipice and instead of falling, decided to run. Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Like a bounce back Mark III, the entire genre received a breath of life, reviving from the lows back into the minds of the entire world. Edgerunners appeared as a shock and showed that Cyberpunk doesn't just have to be Motoko going on her 9,999 mission. It showed that the world, the genre, the theme has much more to tell, that the time of Cyberpunk is not a thing of the past. There's still room for a futuristic, dirty, disgusting, chrome-filled world. It showed everyone that stories are still hidden in the shadows of buildings and beneath corporations and technology. Being cyberpunk doesn't necessarily have to be Ghost in the Shell. It does not need to be forcefully codified into talking about existence. We often forget, but we have to remember that punk, it's in the title, it's not for nothing. Edgerunners shows the world on the edge of the law, what it takes to live in that hostile place. A place that if you stop trying for even a second, you sink without anyone noticing. But if you fly too high, a similar future awaits you. Night City is a useless, wretched place, full of vile and inhuman creatures, just out to live. But that's life, your life, in this cyber world. If you have the audacity to say you are truly punk, doesn't matter what you have to do, just have fun. The top awaits you. You know you won't live long enough to get there, but that's the life of a mercenary. And that in the world you are nobody, dying with your name in history is the best goal to achieve. Just enjoy all this shit going on. Did someone betray you? Your business partner decided to sell you to a corpo? So what? Do worst to him and everyone who crosses you. Nobody is above you. This isn't a fairy tale. Good endings doesn't exist. Join the insanity and try to get your head out of the depths that grip you in that fake city. Because as a great sage once said, Cyberpunk is not about saving the world, it's about saving you from the world.